Hey guys, it's Cole. Sorry I'm running a bit late today. I took some time for myself and went and had lunch with or I'm sorry, I guess dinner maybe, with my good friend Michelle and her parents, and it was a great time. Lots of laughter and silly conversations. So I really enjoyed that. But I want to talk today about um, a new topic, and I hope you're into it. Leave comments if you have any, and yeah. I'm going to stop playing with this thing that makes a lot of noise now and get into the podcast. So, here we go. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk today about something that's simple, but it's not easy. It's the practice of being centered, not calm, not detached, not pretending everything is fine, but centered. We talk about centered a lot, but we've never really actually talked about centered. And so that's what we're going to do today. That quiet, steady place inside you that doesn't disappear just because your life gets loud. We live in a world that rewards reactivity, where everything is urgent, everything is a headline, everything is a crisis. And if you're not careful, you start to believe that your worth is tied to how quickly you respond, how intensely you feel, how loudly that you defend yourself, or at least how fast you can fix something that wasn't even yours to fix. But being centered is the opposite of all that. Being centered is the moment that you decide, I'm not going to abandon myself just because the room is shaking. It's the difference between feeling something and becoming it. It's the difference between having emotions and being ruled by them. And it's the difference between reacting and responding, which is where your power actually lives. When you're centered, you don't lose your fire. You don't become passive. You don't become numb. You become accurate. You become intentional. You become someone who can hold their own truth without needing to shout it or to shrink it. Centering is not about controlling the world around you, it's about not letting the world control what's inside you. And here's the thing that nobody's going to tell you: being centered is a skill, not a personality trait, not something you're born with. It's a skill, which means you can practice it, strengthen it, and maybe most importantly, you can return to it even after you've drifted far away. Most people think emotional centering is about peace, but really, it's about your orientation. It's knowing where your internal north is. So when life spins you around, which it will, you can find your way back. And the value of that is enormous. When you're centered, you stop confusing urgency with importance. You stop mistaking someone else's emotion for your responsibility. You stop negotiating your worth in moments of insecurity. You stop abandoning your boundaries just to keep the peace. And you stop reacting from fear and start responding from clarity. Centering is what lets you say, I hear the noise, but I'm not the noise. It's what lets you walk into a conversation without needing to win it. It's what lets you walk away from a situation without needing to prove anything. It's what lets you feel deeply without drowning in the feeling. And maybe most importantly, being centered gives you access to your own wisdom. The part of you that knows the difference between a real threat and an emotional echo. The part of you that knows when to stay, when to go, when to speak, and when silence is the most powerful sentence in the room. When you're centered, you don't lose yourself in the moment. You meet the moment as yourself. And that is the real value. It's that you get to stay you, not the version of you that's performing, not the version of you that's pleasing, and also not the version of you that's panicking, the version of you that is grounded, aware, and present. So, today we're going to talk about what it looks like to build that center, not as an aesthetic, but not as a vibe, but like as a practice, a daily lived practice that makes you harder to shake, harder to manipulate, harder to guilt, harder to rush, and easier to trust, especially for yourself. Because when you're centered, you don't just survive your life, you steer it. You create your legacy. Let's get into it. So today I want to sit in a space between two voices that taught us how to stay centered when the world shakes: Rogers and Maya Angelou. Rogers and Maya Angelou lived from the center, but their centers looked nothing alike. Fred's was quiet, deliberate, and pastoral, and Maya's was bold, rhythmic, and prophetic. One spoke softly to children, the other thundered truth to the world. But both were grounded. Both refused to be pushed by narratives told to or about them. And that's the point. Being centered doesn't mean being identical, it means being anchored in your own truth and not in someone else's story. So, Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers embodied emotional steadiness. His entire philosophy centered on slowing down, naming feelings without judgment, and responding rather than reacting. His calm wasn't performance, it was discipline. He modeled how to stay rooted in compassion even when addressing difficult topics like grief, anger, or fear. Fred Rogers was born in 1928 in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. It was a small, emotionally reserved town tucked into the foothills of the Alleghenies Mountains. It was the kind of place where feelings were carried in silence, not named out loud. People dealt with life's business first and emotions second, if they dealt with those emotions at all. Fred was shy, often alone due to childhood illnesses. He was sick all the time. He had like really severe asthma, so like in the summer months when most kids would be like outside playing, he was kind of stuck indoors because he couldn't go outside because his asthma would just go crazy, and he also had like scarlet fever and all kinds of things going on. So he was a child that had a lot of a solitude that shaped his sensitivity to children's worlds and like what goes on inside of their worlds. He grew up in a culture that didn't always make space for feelings, which is why he spent his life creating a space for them. Fred Rogers graduated from Rollins College in 1951 with a Bachelor of Music in Composition. At the time, television was just beginning to replace fireplaces and radios as the emotional center of American homes. Families were starting to gather around flickering screens and not fireplaces. And programming shaped the rhythm of domestic life. Fred brought his musical training into the new medium, working behind the scenes at NBC on variety shows and opera broadcasts. But he wasn't drawn to the spectacle, he was drawn to the emotional potential. He saw television not as entertainment, but as a tool for care. While producing the Children's Corner at WQED, the precursor to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers spent his lunch breaks and evenings attending Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. He wasn't training for a pulpit, he was preparing for a ministry without walls. His intention was clear. His congregation would never sit in pews. They would sit on the other side of the screen. He wanted to help children and families navigate their big feelings in healthy ways, using television not as entertainment, but as emotional care. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood aired for over 3 decades, and every episode began with simple grounding rituals, the kind we often talk about on this podcast. He'd change his sweater, he'd tie his shoes, and then he'd feed his fish. These weren't just habits, they were emotional landscaping. It was predictable and gentle and safe. Fred used those rituals to create a rhythm children could trust. And within that rhythm, he talked about everything: divorce, death, anger, fear, with clarity and gentleness. He believed that feelings are manageable when they're named and shared. This was his emotional ministry, not to fix feelings, but to make space for them. Rogers' emotional steadiness extended beyond the neighborhood. In 1969, he testified before the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Communications, helping secure funding for public broadcasting. His calm, sincere explanation of how television could nurture children moved the committee to become one of the most famous examples of this centered presence. His legacy persists not just in modern children's programming, but in trauma-informed education, therapeutic media, and the broader cultural conversation about emotional intelligence. Thank you, Fred Rogers, for PBS. Fred Rogers didn't just teach children how to name their feelings, he taught adults how to listen. He left behind more than a show. He left a blueprint for media that respects children, their emotions, and the way their brains work. And maybe, just as important, he left us with a cultural reminder: gentleness is not weakness, it's strength, practiced slowly. And now we shift, because centered living doesn't always look like a red cardigan in a quiet room. Sometimes it looks like a thunderous poem. Sometimes it sounds like a voice that refuses to be silenced. Maya Angelou lived from that center too, but hers was forged in fire. Where Fred taught us to name our feelings, Maya taught us to reclaim them, to rise with them, to speak them out loud even when the world tells you not to. Maya Angelou carried deep emotional gravity. Her interviews, poetry, and public presence radiated a centeredness forged through trauma, reflection, and mastery of self. She spoke slowly, intentionally, with a sense of internal alignment that made people feel steadier just by listening to her. Her voice didn't just communicate, it calibrated. And that's worth studying and replicating. Because Maya didn't just live in the center, she built it, brick by brick, out of truth. Maya Angelou was also born in 1928, but in a much larger, more turbulent St. Louis, Missouri. Her childhood held immense trauma. After her parents' marriage collapsed, she and her brother Bailey were sent to live with their grandmother in Stamps, Arkansas, which is a deeply segregated town where silence was often safer than speech. That silence would shape her. After surviving sexual abuse at age 7 and believing her words had caused a man's death, Maya stopped speaking for nearly 6 years. Completely stopped speaking. But in that quiet, she listened, she read, she observed. And slowly she began to build the emotional architecture that would later define her poetry, her presence, and her power. Maya Angelou would recover her voice through the care and patience of a kind teacher, and once she found her words, there wasn't any stopping them. She wrote 7 autobiographies, beginning with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and that was a groundbreaking work that spoke openly about childhood trauma, racism, and the reclamation of personal identity. Her writing was intimate and political, poetic and precise. She didn't just tell her story, she told all of our stories. Maya became a powerful force in the civil rights movement, using her art as an extension of her belief that language can liberate, heal, and transform not just individuals, but entire cultures. Over the next 5 decades, Maya Angelou became a cultural force. She wrote poetry, essays, screenplays, and delivered On the Pulse of the Morning at President Bill Clinton's inauguration. The girl who didn't speak for 6 years became a global voice for wisdom, resilience, and emotional clarity. Her presence, measured warm and deeply grounded, made her a sought after speaker and mentor across generations. Maya Angelou was a living blueprint for turning trauma into power and for living your emotional truth. Until her passing in 2014 and long after, her life, it remains a testament to the idea that reclaiming your voice is both a personal act and a cultural one. Her calm, grounded, yet fierce honesty wasn't something she was born with, it was something she built. In closing, 1928 gave us 2 very different, very special examples of people who live life from the center. Fred Rogers and Maya Angelou showed us that you don't have to be extreme to be influential. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to dominate a room to change it. Their lives remind us that real impact comes from alignment, from doing the quiet daily work that keeps you steady in a world that's constantly trying to spin you off your axis. You stop being pulled by every emotion, every person, and every moment. You start moving in alignment with your own center. You start creating an emotional center legacy. Because the space between all the noise, that's where change begins, and that's where legacy lives. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode about legacy and how we can build that from the center. I really love both of our cultural references in Fred Rogers and Maya Angelou. Like I said, very, very different, but very amazing what they were able to contribute and still contribute to this day. Everybody knows who they are, and they weren't, like I said, they weren't the loudest people in the room. They were just the ones that chose a course and stuck to it. And I think that's really impactful and powerful. And that's the kind of legacy that I know I want to live. And I hope that as we go through our lives, we are thinking about the legacy that we live. It's not If you have kids, it's not on your kids to create a legacy for you. They get to create their own legacy, and so do you. And so I hope you really think about that. Think about what you want your legacy to be, and how you're creating that. Um, I know that's something I always think about is like, if I even actually have it tattooed on my arm. It says, "Today I shall behave as if this is the day I want to be remembered," and that's part of building legacy. Um, every day is your moment to be remembered, and it might be the only moment that you interact with somebody. And what kind of legacy words? What kind of legacy do you leave with the people that you encounter on a day-to-day basis? Um, I don't think there's anything more important in life, honestly. Anyway, Tuesday we'll be back with the final episode in our Alabama series that we've been doing about murder accomplice. We're wrapping up with how it is. Sorry, my dogs are going nuts outside. Um, we're gonna wrap up with the mechanism behind the system that involved those 6 characters there. So I hope you'll join us for that on Tuesday. And until then, have a great day and build your legacy. Bye, guys.